Welcome to another video on programming fundamentals. If you're new here, nice to meet you. My name is Matt. I'm a software engineer with almost a decade of expertise in this industry. In today's episode, we are going to tackle two of the most important fundamentals of programming: arrays and cycles. This will allow you to transform all the knowledge you have about how to interact with the user and your programs. We are going to dive deep into arrays, how they are stored in memory, what is the usage for them, and how to use the cycles instructions to iterate through an array and repeat an action any amount of times. This will get your development skills to the next level. Without further ado, let's get into the theory. So far, we have only worked with variables, with units. But what happens if we need to start handling collections, a set of units? In this example, we want to handle an array of pawns. If we want to track the position of every pawn in our chess table, then we will need a structure like an array, where we have a collection of pawns. It is worth noting that in C# and in all type languages, an array can only contain a collection of the same type of elements. This is not the case for languages like JavaScript, in which you can put anything inside of an array. So how do arrays work? Well, basically they are like a lot of variables, but all together, one side by side. We can access all of the individual variables using an index. We will move from the position 0 to the position 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. It is important to notice that we have 8 pawns, but we counted from 0 to 7. That is because in computer science, arrays work with a zero-base index. So the first item in our array will be in the index 0. If I want to access the fourth element of our array of pawns, I will have to do my pawns bracket 3 close bracket, and that will give me the fourth element of our collection. Let's jump to the code and see how are we going to work with arrays. Here we are already in Visual Studio, ready to write some code and start working with arrays. If you are new to Visual Studio and you don't know how I got here, you can click on the link that will appear in here and I will teach you everything about how to set up, install and configure Visual Studio to run a project like this one. Okay, so we are going to drop the pawn example that I just showed you to explain some theory, and because I just like chess and I had a table there to use it. And we are going to be working with more like a real-world example of a system. We are going to be using a dealership for cars. So in this case, we are going to be creating an array to manage the list of cars, but only its prices, because we haven't worked yet with objects and classes, so we don't need to know about all the stuff there for a car. We are only interested in the price of the car. So let's start writing some code. We are going to first declare an array. To declare an array in C#, we have to say the type of the array and then use the bracket notation. In this case, we are going to be working with prices for the cars, and to handle prices, we are going to be using the type double. We haven't worked with double just yet, but it is as easy as an integer, but it can handle the decimals of a number. So we are going to be using double, and then the brackets to declare that this is an array. Then we have to put the name of the array. In this case, it will be my cars for sale, and we have to initialize the array. Okay? To create an array, what we have to use is the keyword, the reserved keyword new, and then use again, of course, the type of the array. There is one problem with this. If we do this, we can see that the compiler is underlining this with red. And the problem we have is we are not declaring the size of the array. Arrays are data structures that are static, okay? Arrays are static, and therefore, at the moment of creation, we have to declare how many items this can store at max. Okay, that is because the memory is allocated in the creation to only handle that amount of items. Okay, if we have like this variable will be one double, for example. Okay, one double, and this is a variable. If we want to create an array that holds 5 of these, for example, if we want to create an array that holds 5 of these, this will be 3, 4, and the last one is a little bit more tiny, but you get the idea. 2, 3, 4, 5. We want to have 5 of these, then we have to explicit that in here, and it will create and allocate the memory for 5 times one double. Okay, so that's why we need to declare the maximum amount of items that this array can hold. And that is a problem with static data structures, but also allows us to have some benefits and advantages that we will see later. Okay, so at the moment of creation, we already say my cars for sale is an array that will only hold 5 values at most. And remember, these are 0 base. Okay, that's good. We already have our array. Now we have to fill in the values for this array to be able to do anything. So to put values into this array, we can just access it through the name like a variable, but then we have to index it to the position we want to use. In this case, let's start by the first position, that will be 0, and then we can assign a value to it. For example, I don't know, 5,344 with 25 cents. If we do that, we will have the first item of our array with the value that we just assigned. Let's draw one more time this. I don't know why I deleted it. Okay, so this is the representation of our array right now, right? We have like 5 variables all together that we can access with one name using an index. I will just accelerate this while I type all the values for this array. Okay, so in here we have already our array filled up with all the values, and if you saw the previous video about function and store procedures, we can encapsulate this in a function. Let's imagine that our cars for sale can come from a database. For example, that would be a real case, a real world scenario where we have a database with all the tables, and one of them will be our cars for sale, or our cars, and then we can have a function that returns them. So we can encapsulate this. A nice way to do this in Visual Studio is by just selecting all the code that we want to extract to a function. You can do right click and select the quick actions and refactorings, and that will offer you some options, and the one that we want is extract method. Okay, if we extract method, that will automatically create a method for us, a function that does all the lines that we selected. In this case, that will be all the lines for filling up our array of cars. Let's call this get cars for sale. And there is a problem with this refactoring that does not work exactly as I would like to, because I want to return this, to return the cars actually. Oh, that's not what I wanted to do. Just copy, change void, and return my cars for sale, and you will see why just in a second. I want to define this outside and do that. Okay, yeah, that's good. So what I want to do is encapsulate the way we create our array, but I want to have the instance, the variable, to access my array outside of the function, because we are going to work with it, right? Okay, this will be welcome to my dealership. That is better. And then we have the get cars for sale, and this is very important to abstract code and encapsulate it. We touch a lot of it in the other video, and we can imagine that this method, instead of just filling up the data randomly with some values, goes to a database and retrieves real values for all our cars in our system, and that's very nice. Let's do some work with this. Now we have an array that is full of values. I can just remove all these graphics already. And let's start by just printing out all of them to the console. So console.writeLine, and I can do my cars for sale sub-0. And I can just create this. I just can copy this and paste it 4 times and go like this. If I add one more to the top, I can say the prices for my cars are the following. Oops, not what I wanted to do. Let's just always remember to add a read line so our program does not stop. Okay, so did you follow this code? It is pretty straightforward. We just get the cars from our method, then print to the console the prices for my cars are the following, and print all of them. We can try to run this program and see what happens. Okay, as we expected, it says welcome to my dealership, the prices for my cars are the following, and then just prints out all the prices from our cars. That is working great, but I would hope that you see a problem with this. Imagine instead of having 5 cars, we have 20. You don't know, right? Because the get cars for sale is actually returning the array already filled up, but you don't know, consuming this, that you only have 5. We know that because we created this function, but if this function wasn't here and was in fact in another project or comes from a database and you don't know a priori the amount of items you are going to get, then you cannot do this because you don't know how many of them, how many items does this array hold, right? The way to solve this is using loops. Also, even though if we always knew that we will have only 5 items, I would think that this code wouldn't look good to you, right? Because you are just repeating the same line over and over, right? This is the same, and the only thing that changes is the index. See that? So the way to improve this is using loops that executes an action a set amount of times. So you can imagine a loop like a cycle. Okay, it goes, checks a condition, the condition can go at the top or at the bottom, it's the same, and then just repeats. Okay, there are different types of loops, and we are going to touch only on 2 types today. One is while and the other one is for. Let's start with while because I think it is a little bit easier to understand because of the syntax. Yeah, basically a while loop, what will do is while the condition is true, while a condition is true, it will repeat all the code that goes inside of these curly braces. Okay, and what is a condition? Whatever you want. You can put any condition that evaluates to true or false inside of here. So the thing that we want to do is iterate over our array. Repeat an action that will be console.writeLine for all the items of our array, right? The way to do that with a while is by using also a variable that will be our index. our index will start at 0, and we will say while index is less than my cars for sale dot length, then repeat our action. And inside of the action, what we want to do is just do the console dot writeLine my cars for sale, but instead of having hard-coded numbers, we are going to use the index variable. And after printing out the value, we are going to increment the value of our index. This can be done this way, index plus 1. The idea is to just increment the value of our index variable by 1, or you can use the easier way. There are two ways to do this in a more easy manner. One is doing this, index plus equal 1, and the best way for me to do this is index plus plus. Okay? This is a neat way to just add 1 to the value of this variable. And you will see it a lot. Okay, so let's think a little bit about what this piece of code is doing. My cars for sale is our array. Dot length is a property, is like a function, but there is a tiny difference that we will take a look at it in another video. But you can imagine it as a function that returns the length of our array. If this is our array, cars, let's put it a short name. This is our array of cars with a 0 index base and a 4, then the length of this will be 5. It is the amount of items. Okay, so what this is doing is initialize the index as 0 and then says while the index is less than 5, in our case, less than 5, repeat the console writeLine that will print it out to the console and increment the index by 1 by 1. Increment the index by 1. So when does this stop? When this condition stops being true. When this condition is false, index stops being less than 5. That will be when index is equal to 5 or greater than, but because of the way this is written, it will be when index is equal. So when index is equals to 5, then this condition is no longer true, and it will stop the loop, stop the cycle, and go to the next line. That is as much as I can break it down step by step. So let's take a look at what happens if we just remove this and start using the while implementation. We can run the program. Okay, so this is pretty interesting. Because we modified the value when creating the array, and I forgot to change it back, it creates an array of 20 positions, of 20 values, but only fills the first 5 of them. And our while will iterate while index is less than 20 instead of 5. And that's why we get this printed out on the console. We have the first 5 values and then a bunch of zeros until it reaches the end of the array. We can fix this pretty quickly by just putting it that back to 5, and now the program behaves as it behaved before. But now the implementation is much better. You can take a look at it, and we are no longer repeating the writeLine, and this can scale. As you saw before, it didn't break because we changed the value from 5 to 20, and if just keep adding values there in the database or in this function hard-coded, our program can work with it and print out all the values of our array. And that is because this part of the program, the part that we are writing as a developer and end user developer and not the function get cars for sale, is agnostic of how many items the array has. It doesn't matter. I don't care about how many cars there are for sale. My task is only to call the function to get the cars for sale and then print all the prices to the console. And this is what this is doing. Let's take a moment to modify this and introduce another type of loops, and that is the for loop. And the for loop comes really handy in a scenario like this one, because the syntax is a little bit different. When you write a for loop, you just write for, open braces, and then you have 3 sentences to put inside of them. The first one is only run one time at the beginning of the for loop, and it is usually used for initializing an index, but it can be used for anything you want. The most common scenario is the one that we are going to take a look at in here, but keep in mind that the only thing that happens really is that the first sentence is executed once at the start of the for loop, and it can have whatever the developer thought was the best to put in there. In our case, we will do for int index equals 0, that is the same that we did in here, but on top of the while we can put it inside of the for, in the declaration of the for. Then the second sentence is the condition that breaks the for, that will be the same as in here in the while, that will be while our index is less than my cars for sale. And the last one is a sentence that will be executed after each run at the end, and that is our index plus plus. So if you take a look, we just wrote the same code, right, without this last semicolon, sorry. We just wrote the same code that we had before in here in the for. Let me copy this back. If you take a look at this, we are writing the same in the for, but it only one line. We previously with the while we had the declaration on top, then the condition in the middle, and then the update at the very bottom of it. We can put all that together in only one line in the for and focus only on the task that has to be done inside of the cycle, inside of the loop, and without worrying about this index and manipulation. If we remove all the code for the while and leave the for, we can run it and check that everything works as before. Okay? So our program did the same in the 3 scenarios. We handled first all the values hard-coded with code, write line, and all the indexes. Then we did it with a while, and then we did it with a for. And in the 3 cases, we have the same results. Now that we are comfortable working with the for and with our array, we are going to be changing the requirement. Instead of just printing out all the prices, we want to print out all the prices, but also print out the index, that will be the primary key or the key of our car, that will be the index of the array, and we also want to know the sum of all the values of our cars. That will be the total value we have in inventory. If we sold all the cars, then we will get this amount of cash. So we want to have the total of our cars for sale. Keep that in mind. So how do we write this? The first thing would be to add in here to the console write line the index. So this will be a little bit complicated, but I will say the easiest way to do this would be to just print out index plus and a string that will be the price for this car is, and another plus. There are other ways to do this, and we will probably tackle a string interpolation and so on in another video, but it's not important for now. So that will print the index, that is the key of our car, and then the price for this car is, and the value. But we also want to have the total amount of all the values for all the cars. To do that, we have to totalize, to sum and accumulate all the values of our cars. So we can declare a variable that will be a double total. You can leave it at total if you want, but I like to make my variables very descriptive, so it will be total value cars for sale. It is a little bit too long. Maybe total value cars is enough. I don't know. I don't really mind having long variable names. You can put just total, you can put total value cars, all of them are right. Just don't put tot or something like that. Don't use like 3 characters because it doesn't make any sense. Your variables should be as descriptive as possible, so that in the future another developer or yourself in a couple of months can take a look at this and at a glance know what this is doing. So we declare our variable total value cars for sale and initialize with 0. This is very important, otherwise the program will break. And then all we have to do is add all the values every time the cycle executes. So all we have to do actually is assign a value of total value plus the value for my car that is inside of our array and sub index that will be updating inside of this loop. Remember that I told you there is a better way to do this to avoid repeating, and that will be to use the plus equal. Equal plus also works, but I like it to do it this way. So I usually first write it the other way so you know and don't get confused on what this does, but this is just adding to this variable the value of this one inside of each run of the for loop. And the last thing to do is to print out this value. We just want to print out the total value in cars inventory would be plus total value cars for sale. Okay, so I think that fills our requirements. Let's run the application and see what happens. If we run it, it will say, welcome to my dealership, the prices for my cars are the following: 0, the price for this car is, and the price, and this, and so on and so on. And at the last one, the total value in cars inventory is, and you will have to just throw a calculator and make sure that this makes sense, but I will just take the word of the application for it. I think it makes sense because we have a 203 in here. That is why this number is so big, and then around 45,000 in other cars, 13, 23. Yeah, I think that makes sense. So that's about it for our little application of car dealership. You have already worked with arrays at this point. You have worked with the while loop and the for loop. I hope you enjoyed this video and you learned a couple of things about arrays and how to use cycle instructions. If you have any question, feel free to leave it below in the comments, or you can tag me at my Twitter, MattCodeJourney. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.